Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Survivor Becomes a Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 132, Bitmori Point of View. The Miners' Guild's smelting facilities turned out to be much more intricate than I had originally imagined. At first, I thought that it would be some kind of warehouse filled with a variety of crucibles for melting ore in many small batches. What I was not expecting was a full-on two-story foundry complex that spanned around 4 city blocks. I felt almost like some kind of VIP being escorted around the foundry by Tilsum and some of his staff as they showed me around the place while guiding me to the station where I'd be working. From what I could tell, it was a rather odd mix of what appeared to be a rather modern techniques and practices with frankly archaic equipment. There were clearly painted lines all over the place, marking safe pathways and danger zones. Not to mention multiple sandpit stations and even specialized water runes with some kind of mana batteries with piping leading to key points around each section of the foundry that created what appeared to be some kind of fire suppression system. Despite that, most of the machinery appeared to be man-powered, either by large levers and cranks connected to a simple array of large gears to move heavy loads from one level of the foundry to another, or by these hamster wheel contraptions big enough for 2 men to run on and power what looked to be some kind of conveyor belt that moves processed metals to another end of the foundry. At this time of day, the foundry's main floor had ceased production and has long since closed up for the day, with only a few members of staff going from station to station, performing some kind of daily cleaning or maintenance. Coming up to the station where I'd be working, I was greeted by a team of 15 workers who were all dressed up in surprisingly thorough amounts of PPE. Even the beastkin, who I've noticed don't normally wear shoes, were wearing some kind of thick wrappings that covered their various unique styles of feet. All of them were wearing tinted goggles and an assortment of face wrappings and shields that seemed both mass-produced and specially made for their various facial structures. Tilsum took the initiative as he stepped forward and gestured at me, introducing me to the team before him. "This is Vito, an exceedingly powerful fire mage who is coming to help work through the backlog of Wolfram orders that we've been unable to complete these last few weeks. He's only in town until tomorrow morning, so we must do our best to complete as much as possible before he goes." The team murmured their greetings, though I could sense an overwhelming amount of uncertainty and doubt coming from a lot of them. It didn't take long before the dogkin man piped up, stepping forward from the group. "How are you so certain that he's the real deal? This isn't going to be like those other mages you've hired who quit before we got started because they couldn't handle the work, right?" he asked, turning his head to look from Tilsum and then to me. Despite the tinted goggles, I could feel his eyes scrutinizing me, as if he didn't like what he saw. He then looked at Tilsum once more. "How much is he charging you for this work anyway?" Tilsum merely frowned at the insult against my ability and honor, though I could feel him understand where his workers were coming from, as he merely shook his head. "I asked him for his help, not the other way around. Besides, as for his pay, He went quiet after a moment when he suddenly had a realization, glancing up at me as he ran his fingers through his beard before chuckling a little sheepishly. "Now that I think about it, I don't believe we actually discussed the pay for your efforts today." I merely smiled a bit before looking at Tilsum. "Don't worry about it. Consider my payment the favor I asked of you," I suggest before looking at the workers. "With that said, I'll do my best to maintain the crucible's heat and stay out of your all's way. My only experience in this place is fire, after all, so I'll keep my focus where it belongs." Now, that does get the mood to shift a bit as the workers look at each other, seemingly appeased by the fact that I wasn't a smug know-it-all or something along those lines. That's when Tilsum clapped his hands together, flashing a wide grin. "And remember, you all are getting 1.5 times pay tonight, along with overtime if Vito is able to handle it. We're only getting this one chance to get back on top of things, so do your best," he explained as encouragingly as he could, the workers cheering in response before Tilsum clapped his hands together a few times, doing his best to get their attention again. "With that all said, make sure to take breaks and play things safe. Nobody's going to praise you for pushing yourself to your limits and getting yourself and others in dangerous situations. Now then, to your stations." With that, the 14 workers dispersed, pairing off and going to each station as I began going through the motions of the work, though the 15th lingered nearby. It was a young man, as far as I could tell, due to their PPE, but not a beastkin. Tilsum then signaled for me to follow as he led me to the set of stairs that went up to the 2nd level. Now at the top, Tilsum approached a console of some kind with a few different panels and even some temperature gauges, along with some few other meters. Gesturing to it as he looked at me. "This'll be your station, Vito. Just run your mana through these 2 panels," he said, as he gestured to 2 red panels with handprints worn into the surface. "From there you'll be able to heat the crucible and control the temperature without having to waste your mana running your magic through open air or needing to make direct contact with the crucible itself. Keep in mind that this is not a matter of strength, but endurance. Do your best to maintain the high temperature needed to melt down Wolfram, and then maintain it. You'll, of course, be given breaks every 2 hours, or as you need it. However, if you need anything between your breaks, just ask him," Tilsum says as he gestures to the young man who stayed by my side. "His job is to support and watch over the Crucible Master. In short, he is your assistant. If you need anything from water to mana potion, just ask and he'll fetch it for you." The young man in question just gave a small wave before speaking up with a rather muffled voice. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Vito. I look forward to working with you," he said politely enough. Tilsum gives a little nod of approval before looking at me again. "Now then, do you happen to know your measurements? We should get you some protective equipment before we get started." I just shrugged before flashing a smile. I don't. But don't worry about it. My mentor always told me that I'm like a dragon around fire, so it shouldn't affect me much. Though I'd like to test the resistance against prolonged exposure to intense heat amongst other things," I explained vaguely as I went about shrugging off my cloak. Tilsum looked admittedly unsure of my claims, and I could sense that he wasn't sure what to address in particular when he was suddenly startled as he finally noticed my missing limb. "Vito, your arm, what happened?" he asked, stepping closer as he looked over the limp left sleeve of my green shirt. I made a show of acting as if I didn't realize what he was talking about at first, glancing at my missing limb before a look of realization came over my face. That's right. Don't worry. It's just a prosthetic, see?" I mused as I took off my shirt, stashing that away before showing him the stump of my left arm. By this point, around half of my upper arm has grown back, so it'll likely take a couple of days for the whole arm to fully grow back on its own, if I consider how long it took to grow half a forearm and a hand. As for the stump itself, the illusion was covering the part of the arm that had grown back. But as for the part that was still growing, it seemed like an illusion magic wasn't sure what to make of it, so the wood was exposed for everyone else to see. That seemed to calm Tilsum for a moment, before he looked even more bewildered as another question came to mind. "Even if it is a prosthetic, what happened to the prosthetic? I could have sworn that you had both arms last night," he asked as he looked me in the eye. I chuckled a little bit at his question before scratching the back of my head. "I, turned it into a staff and gave it to a young mage who did me a favour." Tilsum wasn't sure what to say to that, just flabbergasted by the sudden revelation, before sighing as he looked me over. When he took his time trying to find his words, I could sense that he was at least vaguely impressed with the array of scars that littered my body, though his eyes lingered on the old burn scars that ran across my right shoulder. "I thought you said that you were resistant to fire. What are those?" he asked as he pointed it out. I glanced over to my shoulder before smiling a little more. "Well, they're burn scars, of course. I wasn't always as resistant to fire as I am now," I mused kindly before regarding my shoulder again. "They serve as a very important lesson to a younger me about the power and might of simple flame holds." Tilsum just sighed softly before shaking his head a little, deciding to not argue all that much as he smiled a little. "Anyways, I'll leave you to it then. If you feel you eventually need some protective equipment, then just ask." With that, he dismissed himself, making his way down the stairs. I simply bobbed my head before looking at my assistant as I approached the console while placing my hand against a panel. "Now then, shall we get to work?" Chris' point of view. Today has been a day unlike any other. It started out so normal at first. waking up at dawn and making sure his sister's medicines were in order, making breakfast and eating with her, meeting up with his team. They snuck into the inner city using one of their usual routes and took their usual post outside the pawn shop. But now, their contact with the pawn shop was dead, and they were being hired by Vito, the man who casually made another grown man vanish into thin air. On the other hand, they stole everything of value from the Galkin man's home and found over 60 gold pieces worth of silver and gold in a floor safe underneath a bag of beans in the pantry. The amount of coin in that safe was staggering, as that much could change any of their lives, allowing them to live extravagantly for a week or very comfortably or modestly for several years without working. It did make Chris wonder just how long the Galkin had been stealing from his boss, or how many other thieves he worked with, because, as far as Chris was concerned, his team hadn't given the Galkin anywhere close to 60 gold pieces since they began working together. Ultimately, Zax took the dragon's share of the coin in order to clear his family's debt with the Bank of Time. The look on Zax's face when Chris placed the pouch of coin in their hands was a tearful relief. The half-orc was ultimately unable to remain stoic, as he was finally going to be free from the looming debts that came around due to the untimely death of his parents, and according to Zax, his parents' souls could now properly rest, knowing that they no longer were troubling their son beyond the grave. Surprisingly enough, the Bank of Time didn't care to ask how or where Zax got his sudden windfall. All they cared about was getting the coin they were owed. With that business done, and Zax freed of his debt, the trio split the remaining coin evenly amongst each other before splitting up for the day. According to Vito, they'll all be heading for the capital first thing in the morning, and such a trip requires preparation. Thankfully, Vito said they could use the coin that was left after paying Zax's debt how they saw fit, as long as they gave him whatever was left over. Even as the others left to immediately begin their preparation, Chris couldn't bring himself to get started without going home first. After all, this decision won't only affect him, and if she doesn't want him to go, well, he'll have to figure something else out. He always has in one way or another. He made his way home soon enough, arriving at the apartment complex in the outer ring that has been his home for the last 5 years. Making his way past a few other residents, he made his way up to the second floor before procuring his key as he made his way inside. Opening and shutting the door behind him, he could hear somewhat frantic shuffling coming from the living room as his sister called out, "Welcome home, Chris," she says in a rather distracted fashion. With his curiosity piqued and worries momentarily set aside, he stepped further into the apartment, looking around the little living room as he spotted his sister, the 12-year-old girl frantically yet carefully stashing away what looked to be some planks of wood underneath a cushion on the couch. The coffee table, which usually doubles as her study area, was still covered in paperwork that looked to be some kind of homework, or something. He wasn't too sure. "Ren, what are you doing?" he asked, not exactly sure what to make of the scene that was playing out in front of him. She meeped nervously, her fluffy burnt orange and black tails swishing nervously behind her, before she slowly turned to look up at him, flashing a little smile as she scratched her cheek. Her pale skin was covered in black smudges that were glittered around her hands and arms. "Nothing," she said, slowly dragging out the word as her vulpine ears waggled. "Uh-huh. So there's nothing to see under that particular couch cushion that you're hovering over, right?" he asked, flashing a small smile as he shrugged off his cloak and hung it by the door. "That's right," she said more confidently before slowly shifting around to sit on the couch, doing her best to further conceal whatever she was hiding. "Anyways, you're home early, like really early. Did something happen? Are you in trouble?" she asked, narrowing her gaze as she did her best to change the subject. Now it was his turn to stall a little bit, his tail curling close behind him as he went over to the kitchenette, grabbing a fruit before polishing it in his shirt. "Well, I'm not in trouble, I don't think," he admitted before taking a bite of the fruit. So something happened?" she asked, quick to grab onto the detail as she watched him intently from where she sat. He leaned back against the counter, stalling as he took his time savoring the bite that he was working on, before eventually responding. "I, got a new job," he said, not sure how else to say it when he took another bite. She tilted her head curiously at him, her right ear flicked in thought. "Like a job, or is it a job?" Of course, she knew that he was a criminal of some kind, but he didn't usually share, and she never really pried. Chris just shrugged, now scratching the back of his head with his free hand, as he stared at the fruit before glancing over at Wren, gazing into her eyes where he stood. "I don't actually know," he said, unsure of how to describe it, since Vito didn't exactly give them too much on the details, and he was too scared to really ask. "So what's the problem? Or what's the catch?" she asked, leaning into the arm of the couch now as she watched him. "Is it because of me? Do we need more money or something? Did the healer say something to you?" She continued to ask, her mind running away with possible issues that came to mind as her brow started to furrow with worry. He set the fruit down on the counter, walking over to the room to gently pat her head to get her to stop her rambling. She went quiet at his touch, looking up at him as their eyes met. It wasn't hard for him to see the anxiety in her eyes. "It's not your fault. It's not because of you. Well, what I do tomorrow morning will affect both of us. And I want your opinion, since this is now a family matter." She nodded, seemingly calming down for the moment, before pulling away as she stood. "Give me a second," she said simply, before hurrying off and going into her room. It was the only other room, aside from the bathroom in his apartment, as he usually slept on the couch. He watched her go, though he glanced to the couch curiously, wondering what she was hiding from him. Ultimately, he left it alone. She was entitled to some secrets, after all. While he waited, he walked back into the kitchenette and collected his fruit, taking another bite from it. He could hear things being scooted around in a room, which he didn't think much of until he heard the sound of a lot of coins shifting around in a pouch. Wren came back soon enough, carrying a weighty pouch that jangled with every step. "Here, if we need money, I'm more than ready to contribute where I can," she said resolutely as she held up the pouch. Chris's eyes went wide, not sure what to make of this as he glanced between her and the pouch. Setting down his fruit again and taking up the pouch, he peered inside to see a lot of copper pieces and even a few silver here and there. Where did you get all of this? Are those silvers?" She flashed an almost mischievous smile, her tail swaying behind her as she stood as tall as she could manage. "There are 76 copper pieces and 3 silver pieces in there," she mentioned while looking a little smug. "I've been working too, you know, for the last couple of months. I've been writing letters and documents for our neighbors, and they've been paying me for my help." Chris wasn't sure what to say, looking between her and the pouch again. Well, all this just from writing words in parchment. He couldn't help but be impressed. He had to put himself on the line every time he went out to bring home coin so that she could be comfortable. Yet she found a way to make money without a risk all on her own. She hummed a confirmation before making her way to the couch and putting out the planks that she had hidden. They appeared to be some kind of placards advertising a new deal at the food court. "Mr. Ray even commissioned me to draw up some advertisements for him. He's going to pay me a silver for each of them. I've been working on them all day, and I am nearly done." The placards in question looked really well done, with very neat and big writing accompanied by illustrations of a few different types of food, along with a smiley face here and there. A silver for each, and she had 4 of them just about ready to go. In just one day, she was about to make double what he was able to bring home after half a day of freelance fishing. Tears began welling up in his eyes as he turned away, bringing his hand to his face so that he couldn't help but feel pride at how much Wren had matured, while also despairing at how she felt that she had to step up to help their situation. Wren still hadn't noticed the state Chris was in, looking over one of her placards as her ears waggled with delight. "Miss Ilse says that if I refine my penmanship more, she can probably introduce me to some merchants or a guild in a year or 2. Then maybe I can work as a scribe or some kind of receptionist." She enthused as she finally looked up to Chris with a smile. "Isn't that great?" Though her smile wilted a little as she noticed the expression on his face. "Chris, is something wrong?" Chris did his best to suppress his emotions. At the very least, he tried not to break down in front of her. He sighed softly after a moment longer, a shuddering breath escaping his lips as he wiped his eyes before anything could show. Nothing's wrong. I just can't help but think how amazing you are," he said as he offered a smile before draping his arms around her and pulling her into a deep hug. She was still so small, especially for her age. He still can't help but see her as a frail little girl who was sick every other week. She was better now, but nowhere near where she should be or anywhere like other kids. Wren was a little surprised by the hug, but managed to wrangle one arm free and return the hug with as much vigor as she could manage, her tail swaying with delight behind her. "I know I'm pretty amazing, aren't I?" she mused, preening a little under the praise. He pulled away from the hug soon enough, wiping his eyes again as he stepped away from the kitchenette, while looking over the placards again. Like I said, I got this job," he mentioned while moving to the living room as he sat on the floor by the coffee table. Wren followed, sitting across from him as she set the other placards down on the table before taking up a small bottle of black ink and brush. "Uh-huh, an important decision that will affect the family, right?" she asked, reiterating what he mentioned earlier as she went about adding the final details to the fourth placard she had been working on before he came home. "Yeah, as far as I can tell, it's going to be a long-term job, and I likely won't be back for several weeks, if not months," he explained, running his hand through his hair before scratching the back of his head. Wren's eyes went a little wide with surprise, though she slowly nodded intently. "No, that's very long time," she said softly as she watched him closely. "How much are you going to get paid?" Chris shrugged a bit. He wasn't sure of that either. I don't know," he admitted, rather sheepishly. Wren quirked a brow at that, her left ear waggling with uncertainty. "So you don't know anything about the job, how long you're going to be gone, or how much you're going to get paid? What do you know?" Chris huffed a bit, knowing how bad it sounded before looking over and meeting her eyes. "If I work for him, he said he'll heal your body. Don't ask me how, but I believe he can actually do it." "Oh," was all she had to say to that. "Yeah, so I don't really care what I have to do. If I can give you a future without having to worry about your health, I'll do it. No questions asked," he said, resolving himself already, as he stared into the middle distance while looking at the table. Wren was silent for a time, not saying a word before standing, as she walked around and draped her arms around Chris, hugging him from behind while resting her chin atop his head. "You do so much for me already. I couldn't possibly ask you to do more." Chris just sighed a bit, before offering a smile as he accepted her embrace. "What else are big brothers for, anyways? What do you think? Like I said, this is a family decision, and this is affecting you the most." "Well, where are you going?" she asked, as her tail slowly swayed behind her. "The capital, I think. I don't know if it's our only destination, but that's what I've been told," he mentioned with a small smile. That was the only other upside to this job. He'd lived his whole life in this frontier town, and had no real reason to leave before today. And now he was going to the capital. "Well, really?" she exclaimed, pulling away to sit beside him now. She then hummed thoughtfully, tilting her head side to side as her ears waggled some more. "Well, if I'm going to get better anyway, think I can come along? We should stick together at the end of the day, and there's no safer place for me than by your side." Chris wasn't sure what to say to that. His own ears flicked thoughtfully. I don't actually know," he considered, before looking over at her, smiling a bit more. "But I'll certainly ask. For now, how about we do some shopping? I'll make something extra special for dinner," he said, as he stood, holding his hand out to her. At that, Wren just smiled with delight, taking up his hand as she got to her feet. "Sounds good to me." End of chapter. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.